First of all, I want to congratulate TASC that they organized this type of meeting, because we had a lot of analysis in the country, but very little of visions for the future. And you remember that Mary Robinson, when she was at the ceremony for Michael Collins, she said, what's lacking for the country really is a vision. Now, this vision, can it come from deflation versus economic development? I would like to introduce my short contribution with two remarks concerning deflation and development. First of all, let me see, it's probably this. How do I get to the next one?
You have to use the mouse. You have to use the mouse here.
Oh yeah, okay. I think, and you probably read the article yesterday in the Irish Times about deflation. I think we don't have deflation. What we have is a reduction of the profits. Deflation is defined as cutting the prices under the break-even point, and that is not the case. We are just reducing, for the moment, the profits which had been exaggerated in the past of the tiger times.
So you can. Where are you at the moment?
It's the next one. Development is to be considered as a positive process, but it could be a negative process as well. In the positive terms, it's the economic growth, innovation, social and educational progress. In the negative process, which we were talking about, fear and anger this morning, is the danger of recession, impoverishment, educational dropouts, and other social problems. Now, I'm only talking about the positive development conditions now. And the conditions in order to get this positive development is a clear political leadership and stability, political stability. We need transparency and innovation, economic growth and redistribution, economic incentives and social justice, responsible competition and regulation of systemic markets. Coming back to the neoliberal comments this morning, it's very funny that the neoliberals always refer to Adam Smith and for the free markets, but they never read him really, because Adam Smith already said systemic markets need regulation. So it's not that we can have every market as a free market and we can't have every market as a regulated market. So, come on. The character, obviously, of the positive development is that we need economic growth. You remember the discussions of the 60s when they said zero growth. This is not the solution. Economic growth is necessary, but it is not sufficient to get the positive development. For that we need as well social security and environmental protection. Otherwise we would have a very unilateral process, what we call in the economic discussion with the developing countries as exclusive development, and that's probably what happened during the last tiger years, that the welfare and the wealth went to a very small group and the bigger part of the population didn't participate. There's an interesting relation, what we call growth, poverty, elasticity. If you have 5% of growth, then in the ideal case, the poverty should be reduced by 5%. What had happened in Ireland is you had a growth, for example, of 7%, and you had a reduction of poverty of 0.1%. So what's going wrong with this elasticity between growth and poverty in the country? So what we should strive for is an inclusive development, which means wealth and social justice for all, for the actual and for the future generations. And there is a model for that which has been applied in different European, Asian and Latin American countries, which is the so-called social and ecological market economy. It's a model which is much more political than economic, because the real decisions have to be taken by the political leaders. This model is based on three basic principles. Everybody has to make his highest effort by himself in order to assure that he will be in a more or less acceptable situation. But this is obviously not sufficient, as we are not equal. You remember probably Animal Farm, when the pigs take the power in the farm and write on the barn, all animals are equal. And when they have established the power, they write under that, but some are more equal than the others. And unfortunately, that's the reality. So we need the solidarity of the society in order to compensate certain debilities of some of our co-citizens. That is sometimes not even sufficient, so we need subsidiary action of the state in order to compensate what we can't get by individual responsibility and solidarity. This means concretely that we have to go much more into detail to design the different politics. Competition policy, for example, antitrust and anti-concentration. A regional policy, you remember the discussion here about regionalization, which obviously was a failure. Structural policy, what's about the diversification of the production here and of the services? The social policy, it's not only caring for the weaker persons, it's preventing as well the social debility of certain persons. In the social policy, a huge importance is to be given to the gender equality. Probably one of the key elements is the educational policy, and I'm really sad about the actual discussions about cuts in this sector, but which has to be accompanied by professional training, of course. Tax policy is one of the crucial ones. We have mentioned that several times. It's the direct costs, the direct tax like income tax, for example, and the indirect tax like VAT, for example. And the environmental policy, where we have to take care of alternative energies, recycling, emission control. You remember this remark we heard in the morning, that the alternative energies wouldn't be sufficient for Ireland. I think there was a point left out, which is that we can save a lot of energy if we change our lifestyle. Now, what is the institutional framework we need for these positive development, inclusive development, or as it's called by TASC with all the reasons as a progressive economy? It was mentioned already that we should change from shareholder values to stakeholder values. I think it's important that the different groupings and institutions like business chambers and federations, trade unions, civil society organizations get to a type of balance and countervailing power in their interests. They all have their own interests and they're all legitimate. But nobody can get 100% realized of the interest. So there must be a certain spirit of compromise as well, otherwise the system wouldn't work. What we probably should start discussing much more here in Ireland, and which has been discussed very much in the Scandinavian countries and on the continent, is the role of the state. Law and order, we know all that, but where did we see in the last 5 years a positive design of a development strategy of this country? We have heard that from the trade unions partly. We have heard the vision partly from the business situation, but the state was just doing patchwork, but not developing a real development strategy for the future. Obviously, there the state has the function to watch and to regulate the relevant and systemic markets. We are rather poor for the moment in the production of public goods. I think that we really could look a little bit more northwards to the Scandinavian countries. What I find is a very, very discussable point is the appointing persons in leading positions here in the country, which is going down to even not so important positions. We all had the discussions about the docklands, but if you are going to certain institutions in the sector of education, for example, certain IT directors are appointed by being Fianna Fáil and not by having academic merits. So I think what we really need here is to revise this appointing process, that they are appointed by capacity and not political affiliation. And obviously responsible use of taxpayers' monies, which has been said here several times. So this is a very short introduction, but I think we have a lot to discuss much more about alternative models for the future of the country, and I think the capacity of this country is absolutely here. I personally find that the crisis is not only a great catastrophe, it is an opportunity as well. If you remember that crisis is coming from the Greek word krisis, which means the point where you have to decide where to go. To the left, to the right, forward, backwards. And taking crisis in that sense, it's a great opportunity which forces us to rethink what we have done up to now and what we could reach in the future. Thank you very much.